The step pyramid was producing methane gas, red pyramid ammonia, bent pyramid ammonium bicarbonate, great pyramid sulfuric acid, and the central pyramid hydrochloric acid. And by having a variety of different acids, you're able to reach mine different metals, because different metals will react with different acids and they have different applications. They were also producing nitric acid in another structure that I haven't quite revealed yet. And by combining nitric acid and hydrochloric acid, you can create something called aqua regia, which allows you to efficiently dissolve gold. Which allows you to efficiently dissolve gold. Which allows you to efficiently dissolve gold.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Here we are again. We're having a lot of fun. We are back in the pyramid zone, I guess. There's no, I don't know. This isn't the bone zone, but we are.
No, it's the stone zone, baby.
The stone zone. Yeah, we're in the stone zone. Today we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. I know a lot of years we've been interviewing Derek Olson and megalithic construction and all the things that go along with that. And we've talked about the pyramids quite a bit, but this one today is like a new theory, something that we haven't heard before on our show. And our new buddy, Jeffrey Drum from the Land of Chem, comes on the podcast today to talk about his are the pyramids chemical plants. And it's a very fascinating conversation. We had a good time, made some jokes, and he's an American, good dude, moved over there, put it all on black and went to the Blurry's ground zero.
Yeah.
And figure it out.
Yeah, and this is great. This happened organically. We actually had one of our members reach out and talk about how we should check out this guy's channel. And listen, look, I mean, I love getting into different theories. And Jeff had literally did a dissertation on his evaluation of unofficially on the pyramids of Egypt, perhaps, but a very, very fascinating hypothesis and thesis on the function. What the function may have been of these ancient structures, and it's this is a trip back into ancient times to look at some of the more enigmatic structures on Earth and famous structures. One of the ancient wonders of the world, and then how do we, what were these maybe really used for? Because I think at this point in the show, if you've been with us for a while, I think we've pretty well blown past the idea these are just tombs. There's too much mathematics and function and too little to be just a tomb.
Just a tomb. Just an old dusty tomb.
That's right.
I think it's cool, and it's part of the blurry verse in the sense that, like, who built these things? Where did this knowledge come from? And I think that we got a Book of Enoch coming out soon, and I think we're trying to uncover where all this knowledge comes from, and there's some good evidence here. And I love how all these episodes kind of connect to say that someone gave these people the blueprints. This knowledge came from somewhere else. It's not something they just invented wildly one day by eating some mushrooms. There's something really important here, and just the view into the empire that might have existed back then. Just like when he was describing how everything's interconnected, it blew my mind that, man, this place probably was just unlike anything we've ever seen in terms of like an advanced civilization and what it was trying to accomplish, and why were they doing that, and how it all worked together. Fascinating conversation. If you want to get more of the Blurryverse, you can go to blurrycreatures.com/members. Hop in, support the show. We have a lot of members episodes popping out, and we got a lot more coming. It's how Luke and I are able to do this. We appreciate you guys so much for supporting the show. We got We have a spring sale going on right now. We have 6 new designs on our merch store. Go to blurrycreatures.com/store. Check out the new merch designs. And we love the stories of people saying, I was at the grocery store wearing my Blurry merch and I met another person. It's pretty cool that you guys sport us that way. And Luke and I are blown away that people want to wear the gear. But it sparks conversations, and you guys are the best. Just had a great time in Costa Rica too, and blown away daily of how amazing you guys all are and how much you support what we're doing. And that's how you get more involved. And the tickets are coming for all these events that are going to happen this year. We got at least 2 events coming. So hop in. We need a phrase from Luke right now. We just need some.
No, I'm really excited to have Jeff on, and so let's get Jeff Drum from the Land of Chem in as we head back into the Stone Zone.
Welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Today we have Jeffrey Drum from the Land of Chem. And Chem, as we'll probably hear today, the ancient word, original name, I guess, of Egypt, and maybe where we get the modern word chemistry. And so you have some awesome theories. And one of the things, our podcast started talking about Bigfoot, and we've gotten in some weird areas of blurriness, is what we call it. So we've talked about pyramids, ancient construction. We're Book of Enoch guys. So that's a big part of our worldview. And
yeah.
I love your theories because it's different than anything we've heard on our podcast before. So I'm excited to get into it, but we have a little bit of a tradition here.
Good.
We ask everyone, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot to kind of kick off the conversation? If you have none, I know it's a little bit of a curveball for where you've been and what rabbit holes you've been down. If you have any, cool. If not, we can go right into your expertise.
So one of my buddies back home, so as you mentioned, I live in Egypt now, and I gave up everything that I had in the U.S., quit my corporate career job, sold my house, sold my car, sold everything I owned to move to Egypt.
Wow.
And one of my buddies back home is big into Bigfoot. And they live kind of out in the sticks near a lake. And he said he's, seen some unusual broken trees and heard some noises out in the woods. And he's into these, I think it's like the 411 disappearances. It's a very specific number of disappearances that have happened that are all, so I don't, it's sort of not my bag. And I've dived so deeply into the rabbit hole of ancient Egypt that I really don't focus on too many other, alternative theories, but I'm certainly open to the idea that there's things in nature that we don't fully understand and that we certainly haven't discovered yet, particularly in the deep oceans. I don't think we've explored less of the deep ocean than we have of the moon. So, it's one of those things that's certainly a possibility.
I love it,
dude.
I love it.
Yeah.
And, as we kind of tried to figure out what Bigfoot was, and you go back to the ancient times and you figure out, is this some sort of, you get into Greek history, you get into all these weird chimerical creatures, and you try to put things together, and then you realize, there were rumored giants living in the land at these times, probably building some of these structures, and we see it all over history, and it's kind of hidden. We've uncovered a lot of that. So we got into the giant talk, and the giant talk led us to the pyramids, the megaliths, and Luke and I were lucky to go with 40 of our listeners to Peru last year and look at the construction there. So we've been to these places, we've seen this construction, and we know that it's odd, it's out of place, it doesn't make sense in the modern narrative. And so I would love to get into your theories about chemical plants, because what we know about modern agriculture is they use a lot of chemicals, they use a lot of, and where did this come from? Where this idea? And we know in the Book of Enoch it says that these things were taught to us, metallurgy, and how do they do that? You look at how metals are mined and what goes on. It's a lot of chemicals. And it's a lot of science.
Yeah.
So,
and we'll get into that. Well, you guys are gonna the further we get into the theory and the work, I think you guys will really enjoy the direction of this little conversation.
Well, Jeffrey, I'm excited because, as Nate said, we've talked about the pyramids a bit, and I think that personally we've come to the point that of realizing or believing, at least for Nate and I, that it's not what they tell you it is. Like, you go to the Valley of the Kings, you can see how they buried pharaohs. And these aren't tombs. These are definitely something else. And I am excited about this because this is a different theory than other. You hear about power plants and all these different kind of ideas that people have, but I'm excited to get into yours. And
how did you guys hear about my work?
Dude, YouTube.
YouTube. Great. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
man.
Yeah.
We had a listener send us one of your videos, and I was like, dude, this is cool.
Okay,
Like, we gotta
awesome.
talk to this guy. So
Yeah, so for everybody that's not familiar, my name is Jeffrey Drum. I'm the author of a book called The Land of Chem, an initiation into ancient chemistry through the degrees of the Egyptian pyramids. And my overall theory is that the Egyptian pyramids and other structures across the ancient world were designed to produce a variety of chemicals on an industrial scale. And the title of my book is a play on words for the original ancient name for Egypt, which was Khem, referring to the land of the blackness, which of course is also a reference to the initial stage of the alchemical process, the nigredo, the black stage, the putrefaction or the burning stage. And that is the etymology of our modern words for alchemy, referring to from the blackness, a process of alchemical or chemical extraction to extract the vital compounds. And then that's an etymology of our modern word for chemistry. So my theory is, again, that the Egyptian pyramids were designed to produce a variety of different chemicals on an industrial scale for not only agricultural purposes, but also for metallurgy and mining, as there is abundant evidence on the Giza Plateau for acidic leach mining of iron ore deposits, which is something that I've basically never heard anybody else discuss or even mention, that there are abundant iron ore mineral deposits all over the Giza Plateau that have been strategically leach mined using acidic chemicals.
dude, that's wild. That's
Yeah.
Before we jump into it, how do you get here, Jeffrey? Because I mean, you're an American, you know, and you live in Cairo, and you mentioned that from the beginning.
Yeah.
But you know, how do you go from sort of visiting Egypt or having an interest in the pyramids to, you know, writing a book and then making these really interesting discoveries that we'll talk about when it comes to, like you just talked about the iron mining. I know we're going to talk about the Red Pyramid as well. And
yeah,
but how does that happen for you?
So my first trip to Egypt was in 2017, and it was intended as a research expedition. I had been introduced into sort of all of these alternative theories that focus on the function of just the Great Pyramid. And in my opinion, that's one of the big deficiencies about these specific hypotheses, is that they focus only on the Great Pyramid as if none of the other pyramids even exist or were functional structures. And they all focus on the production of electricity inside of the Great Pyramid. So I was, of course, interested in these alternative theories, and I wanted to come to Egypt to see it for myself. So I put together a research expedition through a local tour company and decided to come and check it out. And I was intent on sort of evaluating these theories in person in regard to what I experienced at the Great Pyramid. But as soon as I hit the ground in Egypt, I began to very quickly realize that there was a lot of evidence pointing me in the direction of ancient chemistry as opposed to ancient manufacturing of electricity. And we'll get to the fact that I've recently released on my YouTube channel a bunch of videos talking about how these systems were powered with lightning.
Wow.
They weren't producing electricity, but they were rather harnessing naturally occurring electrostatic discharge from lightning using dielectric materials and the telluric currents of the earth, which is it's a complicated subject that we can get to a little bit down the line. But nonetheless, my first research expedition to Egypt, 2017, our first stop was a site called Abu Sir, which is a usually inaccessible to the public. You have to get special permission from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to get access to this site. And as we began exploring the site, I started to see these conduits, these long carved channels in red quartzite and very exotic different types of geology, which the conventional explanation that these are for water drainage. But to me, you don't use exotic stone from hundreds and hundreds of miles away that has very unique properties and mineral composition just for draining water. And all of these conduits lead into collection bowls. And the first thought that jumped into my head was that these were for production and collection of various chemicals. They were using very special materials, very meticulously executed construction plans to collect whatever was flowing through these conduits, whether it be, chemicals used for the various rituals or whatever it might be. That was the first thing that popped into my head in Abu Sir. So developing this idea that the Egyptian pyramids were producing these chemicals that were flowing through the adjacent temples and then collected. And then we got a chance to go inside of the Red Pyramid of Dashur, which has all of this chemical staining on the inside of the chambers. And the conventional explanation is that this was caused by bats inside of the structure. And there's a very profound smell of pure chemical ammonia inside of the structure. It's not bat guano. It is not an organic smell. It is the smell of pure chemical ammonia. And it's emanating from what I what I call the final synthesis chamber. So there's all this staining on the walls, and fast forward now 5 or 6 years later, we finally got a chemical analysis through a research team that I'm affiliated with. I'm a member of the research team called the ACIDA Project, and they've been referenced in some conventional archaeology from Keith Hamilton, who's a prolific researcher in regard to the Egyptian pyramids, and he's written many, many papers on all the temples and pyramids throughout Egypt, but he's also a member of the ACIDA Project research team. They took samples back in 2010 of the staining inside of the Red Pyramid, the iron oxide deposits on the Giza Plateau, and hundreds of other samples that they brought back with them for chemical analysis that revealed that the staining inside of the Red Pyramid is a variety of different metal oxides. It has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with bats. And I knew that my first time going inside of the Red Pyramid. And I was really inspired by these two experiences, seeing the conduits leading into collection bowls and the profound smell of ammonia inside of the Red Pyramid. And I remember going back to the hotel that night and talking to my friend that was with me. And I was like, I think these are basically, laboratory scale chemical apparatus that have been embodied within these giant pyramids, and they were producing these chemicals on an industrial scale. So they're essentially chemical reactors inside of the Egyptian pyramids. And that was kind of the genesis of the hypothesis and the beginning of my work. So we ended up going to see a whole bunch of other sites in Egypt during that 2017 expedition. Had some very unusual experiences, these coincidences that just kind of pointed me in the right direction. And when I got back to the US, I hit the ground researching the configuration of these structures in relation to the physics and chemistry that would be required to produce these chemicals on an industrial scale. So to give you a brief explanation of how the Red Pyramid operates, it is essentially a rectangular chamber. There's 3 rectangular chambers, but halfway up, there is a tiered vault system that converges, and the volume of the chamber gets smaller towards the top of the chamber. And basic physics principles say that if you decrease the volume of a gas, you increase its temperature and pressure, which is a very easy way to facilitate chemical reactions. They were doing this by flooding the internal chambers and compressing these gases into the upper portion of the reaction vaults within the Red Pyramid. So I started with the Red Pyramid.
Wow.
Developed the idea that it was producing ammonia. And like you guys said, basically our entire industrial revolution and our progression into a modern industrial society is 100% a direct result of the production of chemicals on an industrial scale, which leads me to the discussion about a guy named Fritz Haber, the guy who created the original industrial scale manufacturing process for producing ammonia. Well, it just so happens that the configuration of his original device has 3 chambers that is configured in the exact same manner as the 3 chambers of the Red Pyramid in Dashur, and they operate using the exact same physics.
It's wild.
And I found evidence that Fritz Haber was a huge fan of Egypt. He was traveling back and forth to Egypt, and his original project for creating this ammonia synthesis apparatus was funded by an Egyptian financier. So we all know that the Nazis were huge into esoterics, ancient civilizations, and all of this protected knowledge. So I have a theory that it may have stumbled across a similar idea to that which I've created, is that, specifically the Red Pyramid was producing ammonia, which has a variety of applications from not only agriculture, and basically our entire modern civilization in regard to agriculture and the mass production of food is 100% based on ammonia fertilizers, but it also has military and other applications. I mean, you can push the bounds of what ammonia applications are, but also for mining applications and things like refining petroleum. And it just so happens that there's a modern oil refinery, natural gas and petroleum refining facility right next door to the Red Pyramid. And I've, in the process over the past, 5 years, I've had people reach out from the chemical manufacturing industry, the mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, mining and metallurgy engineering, petroleum industry. People have contacted me to say that my theory is by far the most scientifically valid and verifiable in terms of the applications of these chemicals, not only in the ancient time, but also the way we're still using them today. So I'm back in the US, I'm working on this book, I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm researching, started gradually writing this book, and I published it 3 years later in 2020. The world was shut down and there was nowhere else to go. And one of the only countries that had its door open was Egypt. And I wanted to So the end of my book culminates explaining the function of the passage chamber structures of Ireland, which we can get to here in just a moment. And I went to Ireland in 2018 so that I could complete my research and write the final chapter of the book. And I wanted to go back to Ireland in 2020, but it was shut down. So I went back to Egypt. So I went in 2017, 2020, 21, and 22. And in 2022, I just kind of at a whim, I wanted to go look at some apartments and see what it would be like to live in Egypt, because that was always my dream. One day I was like, when I'm an old man and I retire, I'll move to Egypt and I'll live my dreams out in the desert researching the Egyptian pyramids.
Yeah.
And in 2022, not too long after I returned from Egypt, my dad passed away. And I had a very profound realization that, the clock is ticking and the time is now. And if you have something that you want to do in your life, I couldn't spend it behind a desk doing my conventional corporate day job anymore. It was killing me inside. And all I wanted to do was this. So it really kind of lit a fire, under my ass to get me going. And that's when I decided that I was going to give it all up and move to Egypt. That's what I did. And it all happened a lot faster than I expected. Again, I had a very lucrative corporate job. I owned a home. I had a car. I had basically the American dream and everything you could hope to have, but it just wasn't fulfilling me anymore because it wasn't my passion. And I knew that, I did some math and I was making a little bit of money on YouTube and selling enough books. And I was like, okay, well, if I do this, and I knew how much it cost to live in Egypt, and the American dollar goes a lot further here than it does in the US. And I was like, so I checked out some apartments and saw how much it costs. And I was like doing some math and crunching all the numbers. I was like, maybe this will work. So I took a huge leap of faith, sold my house, sold my car, quit my job, found a home for my 3 cats, and I booked a one-way ticket. And now I'm almost at my 1-year anniversary of living here in Egypt.
That's awesome, dude.
That's awesome.
Since I've come, my YouTube channel, it's the Land of Chem, the Land of CHEM on YouTube. And I have almost 120 research-based episodes explaining everything with extensive visual presentations and diagrams and animations. I also have almost 50 site visits where I go out and on-site expeditions to go out and explore the sites and record on site so I can document and present evidence of my theories regarding the function of these structures. And my wife, Alexa, and I just got back from a 3-week expedition to England and Ireland where we went and explored structures like we got married at Stonehenge. We went to Avebury and all of the stone circles around the UK. We went to Ireland, explored the Hill of Tara, all of the structures across Ireland, and got some great new footage that's also been released on the YouTube channel. So I've also been hosting tours since I'm here. I have my second tour coming up. So that's kind of the background story on how I ended up moving from the U.S. and landing here in Egypt. And so far, it's been the best decision I've ever made.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. We have similar. It's cool when it flips like that, and all of a sudden you have all these opportunities, and you can't get enough of. You find yourself in the flow, and it's cool to hear you're in the flow. And speaking of the flow, the chemicals flowing out of these things. What I imagine is what we hear a lot on our show is that the ancients had knowledge where things had multiple purposes.
Yes.
And a lot of people come on and have a singular view. This only did one thing, or this was only for one purpose. It was a healing chamber. I'm like, well, how do people get in and out of this thing if it's a healing chamber, only a healing chamber?
Right.
Or why is it built with these certain types of rock and layers? And there's something, we modern humans we don't understand complex machines where it can do all of the things that the ancients needed in one specific structure. Or is that what you find? Or, are all the pyramids kind of working together and each one's a different part of this machine? And so they have different functions to produce these chemicals?
Sure. So to start with the first part that you mentioned there's a bunch of alternative theories about how these things operate in regard to healing and sound. But no one has proposed a step-by-step mechanism of operation. What powered it? How did it work? What were the effects? Et cetera, step-by-step mechanistic operation manual for how these things work, which is exactly what I proposed in my book, explaining what was driving these things, the physics behind the operation of the different materials within the structure. So most of these structures are built with limestone, and the Great Pyramid has integrated red granite. inside of the structure. We can talk about something called sonochemistry, which is sound-based chemistry, where you can use sound vibrations as catalysts to facilitate chemical reactions, which was exactly what was happening inside of the red granite antechamber of the Great Pyramid. And that mechanism was activated from the electric fields that were harnessed by so limestone is something called dielectric material, which the molecules inside of this material can be polarized and thus store electric fields inside of the stone. Well, when you do that, it activates something within the red granite called the inverse piezoelectric effect. A lot of people think it's the piezoelectric effect for the production of electricity. I propose in my work that it's actually the exact opposite of that, something called the inverse piezoelectric effect, which activates the quartz, producing vibrations that produce ultrasonic vibrations. So a lot of people ask, how is this sound activated within these chambers? It's the interaction of the electric field with the quartz inside of the granite that produces ultrasonic vibrations that were used as sonochemical catalysts to produce and facilitate chemical reactions within the Great Pyramid. Now, the second part of your question is, were these systems integrated? Yes, absolutely. All of the structures along the western bank of the Nile River are a huge integrated network of not only chemical manufacturing structures, but also temple systems that were designed for biological, biochemical, physical transformations of, basically we can call it a priest class or the ascended class of individuals that were initiated into these sacred ancient sciences, chemistry being the predominant one that was utilized by this ancient civilization. So the temples were designed for human interface. You see a lot of red granite and white calcite crystal integrated into the construction of the temple. It actually premieres tonight. I don't know when this is going to come out, but I'm releasing tonight my theory on the function of a structure called the Osirion, which is an underground temple dedicated to Osiris. And this entire temple is constructed upon a very, very ancient independent water source. So there's water directly underneath this temple that recent excavations by the Osirion 7 mission have proven that it's not the Nile River. So this temple is sitting on top of a very ancient water source that's not the Nile River. And they're doing investigations to determine the source of the water and the properties of the water. And this was a temple for initiations into the cult of Osiris. And this facility was also designed with red granite pillars integrated within the construction that were for the production of ultrasonic vibrations that caused a biochemical physical transformation in the initiates. They also had to be submerged. So there's basically a central island inside of the Osirion, and the whole thing is surrounded by water. So you cannot get to the central island unless you first submerge yourself in the primordial waters upon which the Osirion is constructed. So these electric fields were integrating with the water around the central island to produce structured water. So it's a temple for initiation, biochemical transformation, and the ritual of rebirth and rebirth and resurrection of Osiris. So there's a whole bunch of different types of structures in Egypt. Not all of them are for chemical reactions to produce chemicals on an industrial scale. There's also temples for healing. And that's what we've discovered in investigating the structures of ancient England and ancient Ireland as well, specifically the stone circle systems like Avebury. So Avebury is a massive concentric circle system that was designed to harness the electric fields from Earth's telluric currents. So telluric currents were of great interest to Nikola Tesla. And these are naturally occurring electric currents that flow through the Earth's crust. And by building stone structures on top of these telluric currents, again, the stone is a dielectric material that is going to store the electric field on the surface of the Earth. And they all had these huge obelisks rising out of the center of these stone circles. Well, the obelisk essentially acts like a lightning rod. So you harness a charged field on the surface of the Earth to attract lightning, which distributes an electric field into two different, it's called the Avebury Serpent Temple Complex. You have a central circle and then two huge avenues of stone that lead out. One is for discharge and the other one goes to a structure called the sanctuary, which is a much smaller stone circle system with wooden beams in it that was also designed for electric field therapy, for accumulating ozone, and all of these negatively charged ions, things that have a very profound therapeutic healing benefits for, I don't want to say the human body. We can push the limits of who we think built these structures and what they were actually for. Specifically regarding, there's some very specific mythology regarding a civilization that came here to mine metals, and that they built machines that were specifically designed to mine metals. And all of the evidence that I've discovered on the Giza Plateau indicates that that was the function of the Giza pyramids. My theory is that, so let me go back a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
So it starts with the Step Pyramid in Saqqara, which was designed to produce methane gas. That methane gas was transformed within the Red Pyramid in Dashur into an aqueous ammonia solution for fertilizer, also used for refining of petroleum products. Again, there's this natural gas and oil refinery literally right across the street from the ancient Red Pyramid in Dashur. And aqueous ammonia is one of the chemicals that is predominantly used in the petroleum industry for neutralizing acidic compounds in crude oil. Then you have the Bent Pyramid, which is right behind the Red Pyramid, which converts this aqueous ammonia solution into a solid compound fertilizer called ammonium bicarbonate. So you have methane gas for fuel in Saqqara. You have fertilizers at the Red and Bent Pyramid in Dashur. And on the Giza Plateau, they were producing two different acidic solutions. Inside of the Great Pyramid was a dilute solution of sulfuric acid, and inside of the Central Pyramid of Giza was a dilute solution of hydrochloric acid. And the inside of all of these chambers, specifically like the Grand Gallery and the Queen's Chamber within the Great Pyramid, were all coated with chemically resistant compounds that prevented the erosion of these inner chambers. And we have chemical analysis of that shows that it's calcium sulfate, which is insoluble in dilute sulfuric acid. So the inside of these chambers was coated with material that prevents corrosion. And there is abundant evidence on the Giza Plateau for acidic leach mining of these metallic ore deposits. As you walk around the Giza Plateau, almost no one ever talks about the fact that there are huge deposits of iron oxide and a variety of other metal ores that include platinum, titanium, gold, silver, exotic metals like neodymium and praseodymium, thorium, like really, really exotic metals that are in these ore deposits on the Giza Plateau. And there's also mining tunnels like the Tomb of the Birds. I just put out an episode about underground mining tunnels on the Giza Plateau. There's these underground tunnels where they've done satellite imagery and radar scans of the Giza Plateau that shows that there's tunnels that run underneath the Giza Plateau connected into the Central Pyramid that are all evidence of acidic leach mining, where they're pumping acidic solutions flowing through these tunnels that have these huge deposits of metal ore. They're leaching out all of the metal deposits from the ore using the acidic solutions, which are then collected further down on the Giza Plateau in a different structure.
Dude, this is amazing.
This is wild.
I just love that the obelisk is like the original clock tower.
Yeah.
Save the clock tower.
I actually put that in my video releasing my hypothesis. It was like 1.21 gigawatts.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way for us to know when and where it's going to strike. And then he holds up that paper and he's like, but now we do.
Now we do.
And that was also the function of structures like Stonehenge. So in my research on telluric currents, it shows that these earth telluric currents are greatly affected by both solar and lunar tides. And lightning is greatly tied. The occurrence of lightning strikes is much higher during solar and lunar tides. Well, it just so happens that Stonehenge and these other ancient stone circle systems were designed to track solar and lunar tides.
Yeah.
So they're literally a timing and tracking mechanism to allow them to accurately predict when and where these lightning strikes were going to occur. And I also put out an episode recently that had proof of lightning strikes at ancient stone circles, where they did a geomagnetic survey of an ancient stone circle in Wales, where they discovered the magnetic signature of multiple lightning strikes at the center of one of these stone circles. So essentially they're dielectric capacitors for storing electric fields to capture lightning strikes. And then they distribute these electric fields into different components, because it's a whole landscape of different structures, very similar to what you have in Egypt. The pyramids are not isolated structures. They're connected into a vast array of other components. It's like a a circuit board or integrated network of different structures, all of which had different applications. And the same is very true about, for example, the structures in Wiltshire, England. There's passage chambers, there's stone circles, there's these avenue conduit systems, there's proto-pyramids like Silbury Hill, and depends on how far you want me to go down the rabbit hole, man.
I want to ask you about like, just generally speaking, if they're harvesting, electricity from the earth and also from lightning, in addition to sort of what you were talking about where there's these, biotherapeutic benefits to that, do you think, what else are they, I mean, obviously in Egypt, we're talking about, these are the ways that they're powering the chemical reactions that you're hypothesizing are happening in these different pyramids, right? So they need to have a power to, and then also I was going to point out, and I know you touched on this, but it's believed that the Great Pyramids were initially covered in quartz, which of course is super, super conductive, right? Like I think about this in the terms of when I went to Sedona once, which I didn't really like Sedona, but they have this mountain out there they call it Quartz Mountain that it gets struck by lightning all the time. And when it gets struck, it makes like a thunder noise. And then they have all this, then it gets weird. They have all these UFO things that happen where it looks like they are landing on this mountain to potentially charge or whatever people suppose. But I saw it. I mean, we went to the UFO tour and I saw these things happen. I go, they're actually doing that. They're actually going up and down on this stuff. That's a bit of an aside. But my point is that they're storing energy. So when you talk about these stone circles specifically, because
let me make a quick correction there. So quartz is not a conductor. Quartz is a dielectric material, which means it has the capacity for storing electric.
Okay, thank you for that.
Correct.
Thank you for correcting me.
Quartz is one of the most abundant materials in the electrical engineering industry used for capacitors and in dielectric applications. But that is exactly why that mountain structure is constantly being struck by lightning, because the quartz within that hill is storing the electric fields that are accumulated from these telluric currents. And it's the imbalance of electric charges. So it's called cloud to ground lightning, where you have negative charges in the atmosphere and positive charges on the surface of the earth. So these mountains, same thing was happening with a structure called Silbury Hill, which is made of chalk, another dielectric material. So it's this ancient proto-pyramid in Wiltshire, England, this huge mound structure that's made of chalk.
Yeah.
Well, this chalk mound was designed to do the exact same thing as these quartz mountains, which was attract lightning strikes, and then they could harness that energy for distribution into other areas of the. But that's exactly why you also have this associated UFO activity,
right?
Because it is abundant electric field energy, and I'm not opposed to the idea that they have an ability to tap into that for power source or whatever it might be.
Thank you for taking me to school, Jeffrey. I appreciate that.
I
know. I'm glad you did, because I think I've been saying that wrong for a little while now. So, I appreciate that. It's good. That's good.
Is that like a static shock? Like you drag your feet across, you store up, and then you touch somebody, and there's that shock.
So static charge is basically the same thing. When you're rubbing against it, you're creating an imbalance of charge between the two surfaces. So one of them accumulates a positive charge, the other one accumulates a negative charge. And then when you get the two together, there's a discharge between those two surfaces, which is called an electrostatic discharge. And that's essentially what lightning is. A lightning is a spontaneous, almost instantaneous electrostatic discharge between the charges in the cloud and the charges on the ground. And that lightning is always going to seek the shortest path from cloud to ground. So if you have an obelisk or an Egyptian pyramid, for example, that is by far the tallest object on the landscape. You look around, there is absolutely nothing taller than these objects in the area. It's going to be a direct path for lightning to strike the structure. And I've also presented evidence on my channel of fulgurites and silicate microspherules from fulgurites. So fulgurite is essentially fossilized lightning. When lightning hits the ground or hits sand, it will cause these mineral formations, basically melting and fusing particles into a dendritic formation called a fulgurite. Well, I've presented evidence on my channel that there's fulgurites and silicate microspherules from lightning, basically providing pretty strong evidence for my hypothesis that these things were getting struck by lightning.
That's amazing.
What do you think, besides like sort of the therapeutic thing? We talked about Egypt and the idea of producing chemicals at industrial scales, and then there's also sort of the other things that are going on because they're integrated systems. But like when you get the stone circles, you're in Ireland and you're in England. What else is happening there in your mind? Because if they're dispersing current, they're harnessing and dispersing it, and they're also they're also collecting it from the earth. What do they do? What do you think they're doing with all that?
Yeah, so there's these really fascinating structures all across the UK and Ireland called passage chamber mounds, like Newgrange.
Yeah, I've been to Newgrange. I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah. Newgrange is one of my favorite. We just got a chance to go in there, and I have a really great Sunday site visit where I do an on-site explanation of exactly how Newgrange operated. It's a chemical reactor.
Dude, that's crazy. So because it's a weird place. So you get in there and you go, this isn't really a tomb. There's not bones or anything here. They say there were bones at one point, but it's just this huge structure with this one little chamber. And if you haven't been to Newgrange, it's worth checking out because it's ancient. It's one of the, I forget what it's a World Heritage Site and however they sort of classify those things. But that's see this.
I can dive into that. Yeah. Like I love talking about Newgrange because I believe that the structures, the ancient structures of England and Ireland were the predecessors of the Egyptian pyramids. These things are extremely ancient.
So before we get there, let me ask you one thing then, because this is a burning question I had. So if we're talking about timeline here, because at what point do you think these were initiated and how long were they operated before they, because we know, right, at some point the pyramids especially are repurposed as tombs by the pharaohs who then sort of claim right that they built them, and I think there's a lot of
just
folks
put some dead bodies in the generators.
Yeah, so like we'll put some guy in here in the chemical room. But when do you think this started? How long do you think it operated for, based upon your research?
Yeah. So I would propose that Atlantis is essentially North America and the civilization that inhabited North America during the last ice age.
Okay.
After that cataclysm, the survivors of that cataclysm fled from North America, and they went to the western coasts of Europe and the western coast of Africa, gradually migrating inland and building structures that enabled them to reestablish their civilization, basically the stone circles of ancient Europe and the pyramids in Egypt. This all happened during a period from approximately 8500 BC to 5300 BC, which is known as the Saharan wet period in Africa, where there was significantly more rainfall in the upper Eastern Sahara. And essentially the entire Eastern Sahara was transformed from a barren desert into a lush area that was primed for agricultural development. And I believe that the Egyptian pyramids were an integrated part of the terraforming of the Eastern Sahara.
Interesting.
So another part of my theory goes into the production of cumulonimbus clouds for lightning.
Okay.
So these structures not only made chemicals, but they also produced thunderstorms and rain clouds.
So like weather control.
The original DARPA.
Yeah.
That brought rainfall into the upper Eastern Sahara. And with the aqueous ammonia solution and fertilizers that were being produced within these chemical factories, they were able to terraform the upper Eastern Saharan region from about, again, 8500 BC to 5300 BC. So approximately 3,000 years of operation while these things were still active. However, there were a number of different cataclysms right around 5000 BC. There were earthquakes, floods all across the Middle East and all across the world at that time that I believe caused these things. So there's been multiple floods. Time is cyclical. Right. And they talk about great flood, but there's most likely been multiple great floods that have occurred over the hundreds of thousands of years that human beings have been on this planet. So there was another series of catastrophic events where the pyramids went offline around 5300 BC. The upper Eastern Sahara began to transform back into a desert. And that's when we see the population migration from these arable farmlands. They moved back around the Nile River. And this is where we see the beginning of dynastic Egyptian civilization around 3500 BC, as signified by the Narmer palette. It's this palette that's in the Egyptian Museum that depicts the reunification of Upper and Lower Egypt. So Upper and Lower Egypt coming back together, which implies that there was a pre-existing civilization. If it's the reunification, they had to be unified at once, separated, and then they came back again. So again, during this period from about 8300 to 5300 BC, the population moved away from the Nile River. They moved into the Upper Eastern Sahara, began farming this agricultural land. This is also where we see the domestication of cattle and abundant agriculture in the Upper Eastern Sahara. And then around the beginning of the dynastic era, the pyramids are already offline. The knowledge of chemistry was still in possession by the dynastic Egyptians, but they just no longer had the capacity to do it on an industrial scale. So it went smaller. And we know that the dynastic Egyptian civilization is the birthplace of modern chemistry. They were the first to create synthetic pigments like Egyptian blue. Mm-hmm. They were the first to make synthetic cosmetics. They were the first to make pharmaceuticals. Basically, every chemical industry that we have today started with dynastic Egypt. They had the knowledge of chemistry intact. They just weren't producing them on an industrial scale anymore. So that's kind of the proposed timeline of these structures that I have in mind, as there are very, very ancient structures in North America that I think predate all of this stuff. But unfortunately, they're mostly now completely destroyed due to the cataclysm that essentially flattened North America at the end of the last ice age.
Yeah, the Niagara Dryas, right? Yeah.
Yep.
I can see Luke getting excited about this conversation.
No, I love this stuff because, like, you're right in the wheelhouse of the weathering of the Sphinx, right? We've talked about this where the Sphinx has evidence of water weathering, which means it had to have rained. So this is, I like, thank you, Nate. I love this stuff. Well,
so I want you to think about the weathering at the back of the Sphinx enclosure more from a perspective of chemical erosion. Okay, so let's say if there was
what are they doing there, Jeffrey, with chemicals eroding
Let's
the
say
Sphinx?
there was a cataclysm or something went wrong with your chemical reactor where there was a spill of acidic chemicals on the Giza Plateau. All of a sudden, all these chemicals that were contained within your reactor accidentally began to leach out and spill onto the Giza Plateau in an uncontrolled manner. That erosion on the back of the Sphinx could have happened in a matter of days or weeks and not in hundreds of thousands of years. It could have been a huge catastrophe that is related to the destruction of the structures for some sort of environmental catastrophe. So that's just something, when people talk about that erosion.
Yeah.
It's like that Chernobyl disaster in a way. And I was going to ask you that because the first time I actually had this thought of what you're presenting is, I think it's the Temple of the Goddess, where it looks like chemicals wash into the stairs and the stairs are melted.
The melted stairs.
Yeah,
the Great Pyramid?
The Temple of Dendera. The Dendera Temple,
Yeah. And I was thinking, okay, this wasn't supposed to happen. Some accident happened here, but what can do that? What can melt stairs? Obviously, they didn't want those to be melted, but it sounds like, like any disaster, you have some sort of tsunami or something come in, you have all these issues. I mean, we saw that last one in Japan. It hit all the nuclear plants, and then you had all the fallout, right? And it looked like a fallout event for me. I was like, this is there's something else going on here. And all these other theories, while it could be a power plant, I think what do you think about that? Is that?
Let me throw another different perspective at you for those stairs. I'm not a huge advocate of this theory when it comes to the limestone blocks used to build the pyramids themselves, because I found a lot of evidence of quarrying and very specific quarrying methodology where they selected natural rock from specific locations and brought them to these temples. But the idea of geopolymer, right? Synthetic artificial stone that was at one point relatively soft. So think about those stairs from a perspective of a material that once used to be like Play-Doh.
Well, that's one of the hypotheses for Cyclopean architecture, right? We just talked about the top, Jeffrey, going to Peru, and you have all the Cyclopean mortarless, and people talk about it being like a synthetic polymer that was
geopolymer, artificial stone.
So
there's lots of rhetoric in ancient mythology about synthetic artificial stone, going back to William Stuckley talking about the construction of Stonehenge, possibly the Stonehenge Sarsen stones being an artificial silicious sandstone. And there's ancient recipes. You talk about these temples in India where there's keepers of the temple that will tell you that this is not natural stone. This is man-made stone that was used with a chemical formula that we've long forgotten. My colleagues at the Acida Project have done chemical analysis on the H blocks from Peru, and they've essentially proven that those are molded stones using geopolymer.
I mean,
now, I don't.
That's what I was thinking in downtown Cusco. You're looking at the green ones, and they look, like Luke said, they look like Play-Doh, a specific green Play-Doh. You're like a kid. You're like, this doesn't look like they just grab some stones from someone. All these are the same composition, all of them the same color, and yet they're perfectly like marshmallows, just fit together. How in the world?
And in Egypt specifically, I believe that they would have understood when to work smarter and not harder. And there's applications for different types of material where they use natural stone for certain applications, but we've also found evidence on the Giza Plateau of facade pieces and other things. So there's a big, easy way to tell natural stone from what could be possibly artificial stone is things like inclusions and irregularities, like huge seashells that are embedded in the bedrock limestone, right? These are natural parts of bedrock limestone that have been quarried, cut, and moved to the site.
Right.
We've also found things like veins of salt that move through one block to another block to another block, and there's mortar in between these things. So an ancient methodology for quarrying stone is that all of the stones are numbered in the quarry.
Yeah.
Those numbers have a preordained place within the construction itself. So they're quarried out, they have a specific shape when they're quarried, they're put back in the exact same place so that you can rebuild the shape that they were quarried from. It makes them fit right together. If there's a slight curve on one piece of stone when you quarry it, you take the next one that was quarried out and it fits right together. So they had a methodology for quarrying and replacing these stones, and there's tons of evidence of natural stone on the Giza Plateau and in the body of the Egyptian pyramids. But we've also found pieces of facade that have zero irregularities, zero inclusions. It's basically microfine particles, completely homogeneous, right? There's absolutely no differences. It looks like something has been ground up into a powder, and then that powder has been mixed with water, set like concrete. So there's a very easy way to kind of tell artificial stones from natural stones. And I would have believed that they would have had the capability to do both, and certainly works well with the idea of ancient chemistry. Requires things like lye and potassium or sodium hydroxides and bases to create these artificial stones.
Well, I was going to say, because when we were at the Coricancha in Peru, right, we were talking about how there were ages of this megalithic construction, and those blocks specifically,
right?
They're like, I don't know, they don't know how the Inca might have been part of that, but it would make sense if they had the chemicals to continue the operation. They weren't the original, but maybe there was some overlap where they were taught this chemical reaction so they could kind of sort of continue, and then eventually that knowledge was lost. My question for you is, obviously we all agree that this is an incredibly advanced knowledge. These things, these complex, I mean, we can't even figure it out today in the modern era. These are all like,
right,
we just see little pieces, little flashes of brilliance. Where does this knowledge come from? How do you think they knew to do these things and build these dynastic empires where it looks like the golden age civilization of every single thing has meaning, valuable in specific place, and it's like someone gave them a blueprint how to build the empire of empires.
So I think we drastically underestimate how long human beings have been on this planet and of the sophistication of these ancient civilizations. So let's say there was a human civilization that existed in North America prior to the end of the last ice age, 15,000 years ago plus, right? The transition that we've made in the modern time from around 1900 to now 2024, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a very, very short span of time. Even in the United States, we're talking about 1776 now to 2000. We're talking about like less than 300 years. And look at the progress that we've made from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution until now in a very short span of time. Well, if a civilization has been around for thousands and thousands of years, imagine the amount of accumulated knowledge that your civilization could have. And we talk about the survivors of the cataclysm of Atlantis, and these survivors spreading out all across the world, bringing the knowledge that was possessed by this civilization. So it was most likely ancient knowledge that existed before cataclysms that were preserved by these refugees, brought them to the new areas. And I think this is where we also get some mythology of the creator gods like the Tuatha Dé Danann. In Irish mythology, there's the mythology of the Tuatha Dé Danann, which are the creator gods of Ireland, the civilization that comes to Ireland. And they had all this sophisticated knowledge of magic. And this is one of the predominant theories that I propose in my work and in my book, is that when you hear mythology of ancient magic, they're actually talking about chemistry. Because someone who is not initiated into the mysteries of ancient chemistry, you could take some sprinklings of metal powder and set it on fire, and you have blue or purple fire. Where you take a clear solution and you mix it with another clear solution, and then it turns red.
Right.
Turning water into wine, right? all of this mythology of ancient magic is a misinterpretation of ancient chemistry from the perspective of an onlooker who doesn't understand what ancient chemistry is.
Yeah.
Chemistry is literally magical transformations.
Yeah.
So there's all of this mythology in the ancient world of civilizations that had magic. Or when you look at from the perspective of physics, there's experience, again, creating static electricity. You get your static on a piece of paper and you can lift a feather.
Yeah.
Because of the attraction, So like simple physics demonstrations would appear to the uninitiated as magic.
Yeah.
So that's where we get this rhetoric in ancient mythology of these ancient sciences that have simply been misunderstood from a perspective of, again, the uninitiated. That's why, again, I call my book an initiation into ancient chemistry. And my book is written in the format of a fictional story of a young man being initiated into an ancient secret society that was responsible for the construction and operation of the Egyptian pyramids. And he goes to Egypt to learn the secrets of this ancient civilization and is instructed on how so basically each chapter is a different degree of his initiation. And I explain in depth all of the mechanisms of operation that went into the production of chemicals within each pyramid, again, culminating with an explanation of how Newgrange and the passage chamber structures of Ireland work. So getting back to that.
Yeah.
So Newgrange has a stone sitting out in front of the structure with a bunch of alchemical glyphs on it. And no one has ever interpreted what these symbols on the curbstone mean. Well, in my work, I have a full explanation of how those symbols are communicating an ancient chemical reaction. It's literally a chemical formula for the chemical reaction that was occurring inside of this chamber. It is an instruction manual.
Wow.
Sitting right out in front of the chemical reactor so that one day people could come around when the knowledge had been long forgotten and reverse engineer and decipher exactly how the structure operated based on the alchemical symbols on this stone. So if you look at the stone, there's a bunch of undulating lines at the bottom of the stone that represent water filling the passage chamber structure. There's a bunch of diamond shapes on the far left side. The diamond shapes represent the initial reactant that was placed. So there's these 3 granite bowls inside of the reaction chamber. So you put your reactant, which is iron disulfide, otherwise known as marcasite or iron pyrite. You crush it up and you put it into these piles in these bowls. There's also spirals moving in on the stone, which represent air flowing into the passage chamber above the water. Well, this is exactly what we could do today in a process. The leach mining is the second part of it, but it's basically oxidation of marcasite in a chamber that promotes the circulation of moist airflow. So then you have this triple spiral symbol on the curbstone. The triple spiral symbol represents airflow circulating inside of the triple chamber system. And this moist airflow, the air carrying the water, causes oxidation of your reactant iron disulfide for the production of a chemical called ferrous sulfate, a green crystal, right? And ferrous sulfate is also a very useful agricultural chemical. It can also be used to render iron oxide and thus metallic iron. And you can also use it to produce sulfuric acid. So it's a very, very useful ancient chemical and one of the first chemicals that was being synthesized by the alchemists of the medieval period. And in my second book, I write about how the Emerald Isle of Ireland is actually referring to the green crystal. Otherwise, no, it has nothing to do with emeralds. It has to do with the green crystal. Ferrous sulfate is a beautiful green crystal. And that's the esoteric symbolism behind the nomenclature of the Emerald Isle, is because Ireland was used for the production of ferrous sulfate.
Wow.
That's great.
I love all that.
It's an alchemical glyph right out in an instruction manual, telling you exactly how the process works.
Luke loves this because you're basically saying the pyramids are a giant whiskey still. And
distillation.
Dude,
Distillation was one of the most ancient alchemical sciences. Distillation is chemistry.
Luke's a whiskey guy.
And making bourbon is magic, so I understand that completely. No, I love this because it's providing function for things that people look at and go, that can't be what it is. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but here's the narrative, right? A narrative is these are tombs, and these are elaborate tombs, and we don't really know what they were doing with it or why they made them the way they were, but the pyramids, New Grange, and it provides this function to it. I think it's a fascinating paradigm. So you've been in Egypt now. I mean, I was looking at your YouTube. You've got 118 videos you've produced since you've been there. What are some real high level maybe highlights since you've been there, maybe of these discoveries that you might have made or connections you might have made by going to these places that completely expanded or provided fuel to your hypothesis and of the pyramids and of the temple structures in Egypt? Like, what were some like monumental sort of shifts that from visiting some of these places?
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing since I've been living here in Egypt was discovering the scope of the leach mining on the Giza Plateau.
That's wild to think about, honestly, like that they're leach mining up there.
It was probably one of the most, and I remember that day vividly when I started walking around the Giza Plateau, and I knew that I was going up there to look for evidence of acidic erosion because I had found it in small areas of the Giza Plateau. But then I really had a very completely mind-altering day out there that I was literally left speechless when I realized the immense scope of operation that was occurring, which again kind of directed me. I try to stay away from that mythology. We all know the specific term used to refer to these people that were mining gold here on this planet, but it certainly appears that was the predominant focus of the operations on the Giza Plateau was leach mining of metals. And it also happened to be right around that same time as I got a whole new batch of samples from the Acida project where they had taken chemical analysis of these iron oxide deposits. And when you begin to look at the chemical analysis of it, it's not just iron, right? They were able to render a variety of different incredibly useful, not only precious metals, but also rare exotic metals from these ore deposits. And again, I'm recently learning about the Tomb of the Birds and the underground mining tunnels that go underneath the Giza Plateau. Also sort of deciphering what the Sphinx enclosure and the Pyramid of Kenkawes. So in my first book, I proposed a function for the step pyramid, the red pyramid, the bent pyramid, the great pyramid, and the central pyramid. And an indication of a good theory is that it is comprehensive. And within that narrative, you can explain the function of all of the different structures for various chemicals, all having a similar umbrella of function. Again, that's a big deficiency of the theories that focus specifically on the Great Pyramid. Oh, this one is this magical, electricity producing device. Okay, if it is that, what are all the rest of them?
Right.
Your theory has to be comprehensive and be able to explain not only the configuration, but also the function of all of these other chamber systems. And I've yet to see any other theory that's done that. So it was really sort of these two things working in conjunction. And then I also had a huge revelation when I realized, again, I always knew that there was this petroleum manufacturing facility, not manufacturing, but it's a natural gas and petroleum refining facility that's right next to the Red Pyramid of Dashur. And I always knew it was over there, but for some reason, I never really put two and two together until one of my followers sent me an email and he was like, hey, I work in the oil and petroleum refining industry and we use aqueous ammonia solution for refining petroleum products. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I had no idea that, again, it's no coincidence that they put that facility right there. And there are natural gas and petroleum deposits here in the area that, of course, if they were harvesting this stuff for fuel or whatever application, whether it be even something as simple as bitumen, right? Basically an ancient tar compound that was used for boat building.
Right.
Right. So the boat building industry would have been a massive industry in the ancient time. And they were taking crude oil and refining it to create bitumen, a process that requires ammonia because you don't want acidic compounds in your bitumen because otherwise it's going to rot away the components of your wooden boat.
Right.
So they would have had to have aqueous ammonia. Why don't you build the factory right next to the place where you're extracting the crude oil? And then you have the chemicals that are utilized in this huge industry of bitumen production and boat building. So it's been probably the most important decision of my life from a research perspective is going all in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to any of the listeners out there, if you have a passion or something that, just sets your soul on fire and it's the only thing that you could ever think about day in and day out, go all in. You have to go 100%. And that's where you're going to reap the full benefits because, again, living here and immersing myself in it.
Yeah.
And before moving here, I got to come maybe once a year. and I had to spend a small fortune on international flights and hotels and investment in the tour. And then I'm here for a week, and I'm like, I haven't even scratched the surface of what I wanted to accomplish here. I need to stay for longer. And then I started to think, well, what if I could find an apartment here for, what I would pay for a hotel night? I could almost find an apartment for a whole month for that cost.
Yeah.
And then I started doing the math, and then I got back, and of course, again, my dad passed away, and it's just like, I was like, this does not make sense. This is not my dream to die here in this office working for the man in a job that I could care less about, when really my passion is pursuing my dream and going all in on this. And it's made an immense transformation in the progress of my YouTube channel, the tours, and all that stuff.
That's awesome. I mean, I feel like Luke and I have a similar story. We're blessed to be able to both do this. This is our jobs, and we're pouring all of our heart and soul into this. And it takes that. It requires that. You have to have that obsessive mind, because these topics are so difficult to make sense of. And then most of the world doesn't want to see it. They don't want to see the evidence for it. They think it's conspiracy, and they debate, and they think you're nuts. But I had a couple questions about sort of why 3 pyramids, you think? Why 3? And what's the main chemical you think that they're producing? Maybe you already answered it.
So there were each pyramid was producing a specific chemical. And the reason for the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, they also talk about the connection with Osiris and the 3 stars of the
Belt of Orion. Yeah.
Or Belt of Orion. Yeah. So on the Giza Plateau, I won't reveal what the final pyramid was producing, because that's something that's kind of still a work in progress coming out in my second book.
Right.
But he's teasing it. He's teasing
that book.
So the step pyramid was producing methane gas, red pyramid ammonia, bent pyramid ammonium bicarbonate, great pyramid sulfuric acid, and the central pyramid hydrochloric acid. And by having a variety of different acids, you're able to leach mine different metals, because different metals will react with different acids, and they have different applications. They were also producing nitric acid in another structure that I haven't quite revealed yet. And by combining nitric acid and hydrochloric acid, you can create something called aqua regia, which allows you to efficiently dissolve gold, which I believe was the end result of all of this mining. There's actually gold in these iron ore deposits on the Giza Plateau. And that's one of the reasons that they were leach mining all of this, is this ancient preoccupation with the mining of gold. And I've certainly found I'm not necessarily comfortable with the implications of this massive ancient leach mining, strip mining project, because again, it leads me in the direction of, again, this mythology. I won't say the name of the beings, but we all know who they are, that came to this planet to mine gold. And man, there's just been so much evidence that points me in that direction, that I talk about it a little bit on my members only channel. I try not to talk about it on the public channel, because it's not really my bag who built them. I just focus on the why and the how.
Yeah. On our show, we call them the Watchers, the
Watchers.
Yeah, the same, just people have different terms for those things. Here's a question for you. So we know that they're making these chemicals. We know that, based on these theories, or where we are in this episode, if we follow your logic, what do you think they're making with all these chemicals? Like, what are they producing? What's the outcome?
Yeah.
If this is a giant factory, what's the end products? What's coming out of the other end?
Gold, baby.
Right.
Gold member. Gold. Everything
gold.
gold.
Yeah. Basically. So in Dashur, these are for agricultural fertilizers predominantly, right? Ammonia is the #1 agricultural fertilizer that we make today. So ammonia itself, the chemical, is the product. People don't realize how valuable everything we have, everything you touch and look at on your desk and in front of you, it's all due to the chemical industry.
So they weren't making Windex? They weren't just making Windex to make all their windows real clean?
Well, you did products like cosmetics, or, again, for metallurgy and other metal-related applications, mining applications. Again, agricultural chemicals are huge. We wouldn't have our modern society if it wasn't. The 2 most important chemicals that we produce today as an industrial society are ammonia and sulfuric acid.
Dang.
We use those for almost every single chemical industrial application that you could imagine. They would have the same applications. So the chemicals themselves are the product that can be used in a variety of other industries, whether it be manufacturing paints, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, You name the product, it is because of a chemical application in industry.
Which would justify the amount of work, the 40 years at least it would take to build one of these things. You would need, because that's so many times on a show, people they throw out these theories. You're like, why would they take all the time and effort, 20 million blocks over decades to build? But this makes a lot of sense, because if you have a central chemical power plant producing everything you need for your empire, you need to build it. It requires
infrastructure.
Yeah, you need that. You need that piece. You need that foundation. It is the cornerstone of your entire society. And the tombs and all these other the modern explanations are just so hokey to me, because it's like, come on, you know how long it took him to build that?
Nate, but what were you going to say that was wild, dude? What was wild, Jeffrey? I want to
miss the wild.
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
So my 2017 research expedition,
give it to
day
us.
2. I had just gone to Abu Sir. I saw the chemical collection bowl at the Pyramid of Sahure. I was starting to generate this idea that maybe the pyramids were designed to produce chemicals. We go to the Red Pyramid. I'm smelling the ammonia in there. I see all the chemicals staining. I was like, all right, the conventional story isn't adding up that this is a burial tomb. I know that this is an industrial scale chemical reactor. And I knew enough at the time to understand how valuable ammonia would have been to this ancient civilization. So we go back to the hotel that night, and I'm just developing this idea that the Egyptian pyramids were industrial scale chemical reactors. The only person I had even mentioned it to was my friend in passing. I was like, hey, this is the crazy idea. She's like, what are you thinking about? She's like, I should get on my phone Googling all these diagrams and stuff. I'm like, look at this. I was like, this is it. She's like, you're crazy, whatever. So we go back to the hotel, and I had to go to the front desk to get a new key made. And before moving to Egypt, I lived in the southeast United States. So I go to the front desk, I'm getting this key made, and I hear behind me a very distinct Southern accent. And I knew that it was some from the same neck of the woods where I used to live. So I turn around, and there's a guy, white guy, and his Egyptian escort, brought him there from the airport. I said, hey, I recognize your Southern accent. Where are you from? He said he's from the exact same city that I used to live in. We just so happened to run into each other in this infinitesimally small instant when I was in the hotel lobby getting this key made. So I turn around, I'm checking this guy out, and he looks normal. But man, this guy had like chameleon eyes, where one of them was kind of operating independently, and they were kind of looking at me. And I was like, this guy has my attention.
He's keeping an eye. Right? He's keeping an eye on you.
So he had this, very weird opinion. Everything kind of normal. I was like, hey, there's something kind of off about this guy. So I'm kind of just asking him some general questions. I was like, what are you doing in Egypt? He's like, said he worked for the TSA, and he was on vacation. And instead of going home to visit his family, he decided he was going to come to see the pyramids in Egypt. And he was stationed there for all this whole story, right? So I'm like, okay, you got my attention. So I said, hey, come down. We're gonna go upstairs and change. Come down and meet us for dinner at the hotel pool. And, we'll just talk and, whatever. He's like, fine. So we get this huge spread. He comes down. We try to offer him some food. Like, you want something to eat? He said, wouldn't eat a thing. So we're sitting down there eating this huge meal. He didn't eat anything. And he was like, and then he starts asking me these questions. He's like, so what are you researching here in Egypt? I said, well, came here to look at the electricity thing. And I haven't really found evidence of electricity, but I found evidence of chemicals. Like, chemicals. He's like, what kind of chemicals do you think they were making? So I started getting into them. So he was just reeling me in, like, he's like, oh. So I was just like biting. I was like, okay, here we go. So I started getting into the whole thing. And he already knew exactly what I was doing there. Everything that I said, he was just like, yeah, of course. He was just kind of confirming. And it was one of the strange, and again, I struggle to call that this person was a human being. Again, who knows? Coincidences happen. Right. And people travel all the world and all this stuff. He already knew exactly what I was doing there. He knew what I was looking into. He had ideas that he proposed about the function of the Serapeum, which is this underground tunnel system that has these huge box containers. And he was like, what if they were storing waste materials in there? And I was like, I was like, he was already in the know about everything that I was proposing. And I hadn't even began to develop this idea yet. So it was just a very one of those kind of odd experiences where, he was just baiting me, just waiting there in the lobby. Oh, I'm from the same place. And I said, where are you from in the XYZ city? Literally 5 minutes down the road from where I used to live.
Wow, dude.
So it was just one of those experiences where I don't think anything in life is a coincidence.
Right.
Everything happens for a reason. And I do believe, whether you want to call them angels or watchers or, whatever there is, there's people out there from maybe the spiritual realm that are keeping an eye on what we're doing here on this. That was just one of the indications where my friend that was with me, we were both kind of looking back and forth like, well, who the hell is this guy? Like, what is he, because he already knew. It's one of those theories where it's so far out there. At the time, I hadn't built all of the scientific justification and the explanations that I have now for all of the mechanisms of operation regarding the physics and the chemistry. He already knew everything.
So we call that blurry here in our show. It's like very blurry experience. Like
it was for sure. For sure.
I think I've got one last question for you, and that is, as you proposed and sort of built the argument for, for this being the purpose and function of not only just the pyramids, but also as you get into these ancient structures in, in the British Isles, et cetera. Like, how has this been received? Because when you're the guy out there that's pushing the new idea, especially when you're up against Hawass and the entire Egyptian Department of Antiquity and all of these archaeologists and all what the mainstream narrative. How has that been for you? Because we operate in the same space in some ways, right? Like we offer like, hey, maybe the truth is a lot weirder than we're being told, and maybe we're not being told a lot of what is the truth, et cetera, right? That's where our show lives. And so how's that been for you, man? How has this been received, generally speaking, as you built out this thesis for your hypothesis?
So my explanation for that would be twofold. So since I've lived here in Egypt, I've been interacting with the tour industry here in Egypt. All of the guides and people that work for the Ministry of Antiquities. I had the lead director of the Giza Plateau come and walk with my tour group as a private personal escort on the Giza Plateau. And he even proposed and told our tour group some things that were way outside of the conventional explanation. And I can go ahead and tell you, he said that there's connections and secret passages that connect the Great Pyramid into the Sphinx enclosure, which is a direct part of how I think that these systems operated. And he said for sure, he was like, that Khufu and Khafra didn't build these things. And they know for sure, now they're talking about there's this whole search for Khufu, right? The Ministry of Antiquities is now searching for the burial of Khufu, and they're basically admitting that the Great Pyramid was never intended for an actual burial. So just because somebody works for the Department of Antiquities and tourism, and they walk the party line, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they believe 100%, but they just have to say that in public because that's their job. When you talk to these people, like I have a friend who's the lead archaeologist in Saqqara, and I have friends that are archaeologists and that work for the Ministry of Antiquities, and they all entertain sort of the alternative theories about these things because nobody really knows for sure, right? It's just the best explanation for what these structures are. So generally speaking, everybody here is pretty receptive. And, even Hawass has said that he was a fan of the alternative community because at the end of the day, they're just bringing more tourist dollars into Egypt.
Oh, yeah. So
people can believe whatever they want to believe as long as they're coming here to see it.
Spoken like a true businessman, right? He's like, I don't care what you think. Yeah.
That's what it is. It's the business of Egyptian tourism. And, they can promote their narrative, but there's always going to be the alternative community that come here for, they think they're temples for meditation, and they go in there and they do this chanting and all this kind of stuff in the temples. And hey, man, people love that stuff. And whatever you think it is. I remember my first trip to Egypt, my friend Yusuf said that no matter what your theory or idea is about ancient Egypt, you will find evidence of it here. Because the knowledge of this ancient civilization is so comprehensive, and it is literally embodied in all of these structures. So whether you're looking at it from the perspective of geometry and mathematics, all the sophisticated knowledge of geometry and mathematics and all these things, you'll find it. You think they're tombs? You'll find it. You think they're celestial maps and alignments with all the constellations? You'll find that. You think they're chemical plants? You'll find that. Because again, there's so much knowledge embedded and encoded within these structures that regardless of which perspective you view it, you will find evidence for that here.
Wow.
And I will say that one of the most encouraging and rewarding things about the general response is getting emails from people that are in the industries, people that are chemical engineers. I get an email, I'm a chemist, a chemical engineer, and I work with Sono chemical catalysts. And your interview on XYZ channel where you're talking about acoustic catalysts inside the Great Pyramid, that's what we do.
That's amazing.
And you're spot on about how it would work. And getting people from the mechanical or, acoustical engineers or physicists that have reached out and say, hey, I just found out about your YouTube channel and I'm going down the rabbit hole, and you're more on track with this stuff than anybody else that we've come across. So that's been one of the kind of biggest rewards, is seeing the YouTube grow, and all that is great. But when you get response for people that are really in the know, and I work with a chemical engineer. Before I published my book, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to present this publicly, that I didn't make a fool of myself.
Right.
So the universe works in mysterious ways, and I got in touch with a chemical engineer through my father, and I presented my original presentation on this to him. And at the beginning of that meeting, he said, all right, Jeff, I'm going to listen to this, but I'm going to treat you like one of my grad students. He was a master's level professor of chemical engineering. He said, I'm going to treat you like a grad student. And he literally tore the thing to shreds and had me build it back piece by piece by piece, explaining every single mechanism and chemical reaction and temperatures and pressures and minerals, all of this, everything that would be required to scientifically validate these theories, make sure all my T's were crossed and I's were dotted. And at the end of the day, he said, this is the most verifiable theory of the alternative function of the Egyptian pyramids. And he was kind of into that stuff anyway. He's kind of an old guy, retired. So that was really what gave me the confidence to present this material in a public fashion, because I worked on it in secret for 3 years. I never told anybody. Not even my closest friends knew what I was working on behind the scenes, but I was writing this book, doing this research, basically a hermit for 3 years, where all I did was go to the gym and write and read and research.
I mean, it's basically it's basically a dissertation. I mean, really. I mean, you had a chair.
Essentially.
Yeah, you had a chair. That's phenomenal. I mean, if you're going to have something, like you said, I love that, because there's a lot of researchers out there that they want to put their theory out before they've really built it, reverse engineered it. And I think that's becomes a fallacy. People tend to not trust alternative theories, because sometimes they are that way. Yeah. And so, I mean, just to commend for the work you've put in. I mean, having the right folks that look at it, I mean, it's just done the right way. And I'm excited for our listeners to be able to hear about this, and take a look at it. It's so very interesting, and I like what you said too, because it's like it's the antithesis of Bono, right? Who still hasn't found what he's looking for, right? But if you come to Egypt, you will find what you're looking for.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Like on our show, we talk about creatures, and if we talk the most popular creatures like Bigfoot. If you want to talk about UFOs and Bigfoot, you'll find it. If you want to talk about it being an animal, you'll find it. If you want to talk about it going through portals, you'll find it. Disappearing, communicating telepathically, you'll find all these stories. And the hardest part about doing the research is you want to throw out some of the stuff, because your theory, you don't go with the data, you go with your gut, and sometimes that can mess you all up. But you have to put it all on the table, sort through it all, and say. And I think we find that D, all the above, is usually the answer for all these weird sort of esoteric topics of whether it comes to aliens, UFOs, ancient construction. I mean, it's usually all of it. It's kind of all happening. And for whatever reason, modern minds we're very hyper-focused. We're specific. We're specialists in just one area. And it takes a mind that you can put all these pieces together and say, what about this? What about all these things? So I like your research. I like your mind. And I like that it's a brand new theory that, we've never heard that before on our show. And we've been talking about this for three plus years. So it's cool it helps tie a lot of those parts together. Why they spent so much time building these things, why these ancient, these rocks just look like they're melted, why, how they were able to control weather, and why they built certain places, and it's connected to the land and ley lines and all the weird stuff we hear on our show. Right. And it's like, I think the people discussing the function of the Egyptian pyramids is a relatively limited space. The one major person is Christopher Dunn, right? Everybody in this sort of ancient technology realm knows about Christopher Dunn, but he's really the only person that's actually spoken up and proposed a relatively scientific theory about the function of the Great Pyramid. And I think for the most part, people are more interested in talking about the mystery and the what if or the why or the how than actually sticking their neck out and risking their integrity or their, whatever, to actually propose a theory.
Right.
And for me, my original intention was to write a research paper. But my dad, in his infinite wisdom, when I showed him the same presentation that I showed Ed, the chemical engineer, he's like, dude, just write a book. Just tell the story. You're not an academic. You're not involved with the university. Nobody's going to read your research paper because you'll never get it published anywhere. Right. Just write a book and tell the story. And I knew then when he told me that he was right, of course. And there's a great quote by Rudyard Kipling that says, if history were told in the form of stories, then it would never be forgotten. And it was so much more interesting and compelling to write this beautiful narrative about a young man going to Egypt to be, it's literally sort of
autobiography. Autobiography.
My own research expeditions. And I used my firsthand experience and integrated it with a narrative that explained exactly how all of these things work. And it also gave me the platform to produce my YouTube channel, which was really my ultimate goal, was so that I could present all of the diagrams and animations and all of the specific information that's essential to understanding this theory. And to all the listeners out there, again, my YouTube channel is The Land of Chem, CHEM. My website is also thelandofchem.com. So the shirt that I'm wearing, you'll get a kick out of this. So this is actually Newgrange here, down at the bottom. This is and this is a symbol known as the green lion, which is an alchemical symbol for ferrous sulfate, the chemical that was being produced inside of Newgrange. And ferrous sulfate is actually utilized in gold extraction. So you can use ferrous sulfate to precipitate gold that has been dissolved in a solution of aqua regia. So that's another major reason why they were producing this ferrous sulfate chemical, was for processing and rendering gold that was dissolved in an acidic solution. And that's what this symbol on. So I have a bunch of Land of Chem merch. Also, my book is available on the website.
That's good.
And Jeff, I highly recommend checking out the YouTube channel. Again, almost 120 research-based episodes, 50 on-site expeditions where I go out to the Giza Plateau, I go inside the Red Pyramid, I go out and explore these structures, on-site, in person, so that you can literally see and experience what it's like to be inside of these pyramids with on-site explanations of how it all works. One of my favorite ones was my recent Sunday site. I call them Sunday site visits because they always come out on Sunday. Sunday site visit to Newgrange, where my wife and I went to Newgrange and walked around, and I explained exactly how all of it operated, starting at the visitor center, walking through the visitor center, and then going out to the site, showing how the curbstone explains exactly what was occurring inside of the reaction chambers. And again, I put 3 years of work into this theory before I ever discussed anything publicly. And I really wanted to make sure that, if this was going to be my legacy, that it was a solid foundation that I could stand on. And again, to kind of reiterate, one of the most rewarding things has been the response from people in the industry, chemists, physicists, academics, who say, you're really on the right track, and don't stop doing what you're doing.
That's awesome.
And at the end of the day, I have no intention of changing any narratives. Nobody's ever going to change the narrative of the dynastic burial. I'm just here to kind of do my own thing and to tell a different story. And if all that ever amounts to is having a book and a YouTube channel and doing some tours, that makes me really, really happy just doing what I'm doing. So
love that, man.
Like it.
Yeah, Jeff, you're a pro too, because you know what, we were going to ask you to plug your stuff, and you went right into it.
Oh yeah, shameless plug, man.
Yeah. He's a pro, man. I love it. Yeah,
I love your passion and your brain. You're way smarter than we are. It'd be fun maybe in the future if you ever.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I'm very specified in the little bit on the function of the Egyptian pyramids and the relevant chemistry. That's kind of my specialty.
If you saw me in chemistry class, you'd say otherwise. But appreciate that.
And it might be fun if you're up for it to have you back at some point to talk about specifically just talking about Europe and stone circles, because I think that would be, we could have a whole discussion on that as well.
Yes, we really just covered the surface, the tip of the iceberg of everything that I've presented in the book and on the YouTube channel. There's so much more to go into regarding the specific mechanisms of operation of how all these systems work, how they were using some of these structures to produce cumulonimbus clouds to generate lightning, distribution of the electric fields. There's so much more to discuss.
Let's do it, man. If you enjoyed this, and this can come out of the edit, but if you enjoyed this, then this is fat. We'd love to have you back. So I'll reach out, let you know when this comes out. Probably going to be next week or the week after, based on our flow, or might be the week after next.
Might even be sooner.
And I highly recommend all your listeners go check out. Well, probably when this comes out, the episode would have already dropped. But the function of the Osirion, it's one of my favorite episodes. It's an ancient temple for initiation that utilizes all of the physics-based applications within its operation in terms of electric fields producing ultrasound, electric fields creating structured water. But it was also a temple for ancient initiations into the cult of Osiris.
Wild,
it's one of my favorite episodes that I've made in quite a while. So
it'd be awesome to also talk. I mean, we've done some tours ourselves with our listeners. If maybe down the road,
we've never done to Egypt. Yeah, we might have a partner. Yeah, we have a pretty good reach. We built something really kind of special here, and we took 40 people to Peru, and it sold out in what, Nate, like 36 hours. Yeah, I mean it was like 2 days.
So this is going to come out, a week from now, which basically today is the deadline for my upcoming tour in March.
Yeah.
This is going to be my second tour. It's the Land of Chem, Ancient Alchemy and Ascension Tour. And this is my second one. We have special permission to numerous different areas that are off limits to the public. We have special permission to Abu Sir. We have special permission, private entry into all 3 chambers of the Great Pyramid, where no other tourists will be inside the structure. We get private access. We're going to do that at night and get access into all 3 chambers. And we also have special permission access into the Osiris Shaft, which is a 30-meter underground structure where you climb down a series of ladders to get to these underground chambers. So that's going to be a whole lot of fun.
We'll have to stay in touch, because these would be interesting synergies, really would. And I think, I love this conversation. And I'm like the history guy, so I know Nate's always like, Luke's gonna love this. I'm like, yeah, this is wheelhouse.
Well, if you guys have never come, come just for the experience. And if you need anything in terms of setting up a tour and getting all that, I basically work with a local tour company to facilitate. My parents are coming soon. I set them up with hotels and tours and all that stuff. Basically, you get picked at the airport, private escort through customs and the visa process. They take you right to a hotel that we set up for all of our guests. So that's another side of what I'm doing here is doing tours.
Jeff, it's awesome, man. Dude, Go ahead, Nate. Go ahead. What?
Well, I was gonna say we just did an event in Costa Rica, and we did 2 events in the last year. So our listeners just want to hang out and do stuff and go places, and so it'd be fun to maybe.
We also have kids. Sometimes makes it hard.
We also have kids, so
it makes it a little tough sometimes.
Makes it a little tough, but
appreciate
that's
it. The only part of the equation that I haven't been blessed with quite yet, but maybe sometime soon.
Come on, man.
Hey, if you hang out in these pyramids, you might get real fertile.
You had to make the move. Yeah.
In 2022, and keep all this in. Yeah. In 2022, my friend and guide Yusuf, he was like, we were talking about kids, and he was like, maybe that's the next step for you, but God has given you a reason why it hasn't happened yet, and that was to give me the opportunity to move to Egypt. Because if I had children, a wife and children at that time, it basically would have been impossible and very, very irresponsible for me to sell everything that I own and pack my bag. I basically came to Egypt with absolutely nothing, 2 bags worth of clothes, no apartment, no plan, no idea how to figure it out.
Dude, I love it, bro.
Part 2,
my man. I know you're. It's nighttime there in Cairo, but we're grateful, bro. And Nate was gonna say this. He may edit this today and put it out tonight, so it might come out sooner than.
No, guys, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. Again, all the listeners, check out thelandofchem.com and the Land of Chem on YouTube. I also have a members-only channel with exclusive research, unreleased footage. I really, really appreciate the support, guys. Hope to talk to you soon.
It was awesome.
As we see here in Egypt, Shukran Jazila wa Masalema. That means thank you so much, and peace be with you.
Right. My man. Appreciate it, brother. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Yeah.
All right, guys. Later.
Thanks,
thank you so much.
Yeah, man.
No problem.
Bye.